Imagine spending your last 76 days on Earth in a cell so small you can barely stand upright. Your hair has turned completely white from terror. Your body is racked with hemorrhaging, so severe that the guards have to change your blood-soaked bedding daily. You once lived in a palace with 2,300 rooms, but now you share your final moments with rats and the constant stench of human waste. This was the reality for Marie Antoinette, the woman who went from being the most powerful queen in Europe to prisoner number 280 in France's most notorious prison. But what really happened during those final, horrifying weeks? And why do some historians believe her death was orchestrated by forces far more sinister than revolutionary justice? The truth about Marie Antoinette's last days is darker than any Hollywood drama could ever imagine. To understand the horror of Marie Antoinette's final days, we need to step back to August 1792. The woman who once hosted lavish parties at Versailles was now huddled with her family in the Temple Tower, a medieval fortress that had been converted into a revolutionary prison. But even this wasn't the beginning of her nightmare. For months, she had watched as her world crumbled piece by piece. The palace she called home had been stormed by angry mobs. Her friends had either fled the country or been executed. The very people she had tried to help with charity work now screamed for her blood in the streets. What's particularly chilling is that Marie Antoinette seemed to know exactly what was coming. In letters smuggled out of the temple, she wrote to her friend Madame de Polignac, "I exist, nothing more. If you knew how everything here crushes me, you would understand why I can only think of death." The family's imprisonment at the temple was psychological torture disguised as mercy. They were given decent rooms, allowed to dine together, and could even play games. But they were constantly watched. Every conversation was monitored. Every letter was intercepted. The guards made sure they knew that at any moment, everything could change. And then it did. On January 21st, 1793, Marie Antoinette heard the drums. She knew what they meant before anyone told her. Her husband, King Louis XVI, had just been executed. The woman who had once been called the Queen of Fashion collapsed to the floor, her elaborate court dresses now replaced with simple black mourning clothes that would become her uniform until death. But losing her husband was only the first domino to fall. What came next would break her spirit completely. If you think losing a spouse is the worst pain imaginable, consider this. 3 months after Louis XVI's execution, revolutionary guards burst into Marie Antoinette's room at midnight. They had come for her 8-year-old son, the boy she had been desperately trying to protect from the horrors surrounding them. The scene that followed was heartbreaking. Marie Antoinette threw herself between the guards and her child, begging them not to take him. Her daughter, 15-year-old Marie-Thérèse, clung to her little brother, screaming that they would have to kill her to separate them. But revolutionary justice had no room for maternal love. They ripped the boy from his mother's arms and dragged him to a cell on the floor below. Marie Antoinette could hear his cries echoing through the stone walls, but she would never see him again. What makes this even more tragic is that young Louis Charles, now proclaimed King Louis XVII by royalist supporters, was placed in the care of a cobbler named Antoine Simon. Simon had explicit instructions to make the boy forget his royal birth. This meant forcing the child to swear, drink alcohol, and sing revolutionary songs that mocked his dead father. The psychological torture of a young 8-year-old was considered necessary for the revolution's success. Marie Antoinette's health began to deteriorate rapidly after losing her son. The woman who had once been famous for her porcelain-like complexion now looked decades older than her 37 years. Her hair, once a symbol of royal luxury, turned completely white almost overnight. Guards reported that she would spend hours at her small window, trying to catch glimpses of her son in the courtyard below. But the revolutionaries weren't finished with her yet. In July 1793, just 5 months after her son was taken, they came for Marie Antoinette herself. She was to be transferred from the Temple Tower to the Conciergerie, a prison so notorious that it was known as the antechamber to death. Nearly everyone who entered the Conciergerie cells was destined for the guillotine. What's particularly cruel is how they told her. A guard simply appeared at her door one morning and announced, "Citizen Capet, you're moving." They had even stripped her of her name, reducing the former Queen of France to Citizen Capet, a reference to an ancient royal dynasty. As she gathered her few remaining possessions, Marie Antoinette had no idea that her new home would make the Temple Tower look like a luxury hotel. The Conciergerie was hell on earth, and Marie Antoinette's cell was the worst part of it. Imagine a space barely 6 feet wide and 9 feet long, with walls so damp that water constantly dripped onto the floor. The ceiling was so low that she couldn't stand upright without hunching over. A small, barred window near the ceiling provided the only light, and even that was often blocked by the legs of people walking in the courtyard above. But the physical conditions were just the beginning of her torture. Marie Antoinette was under constant surveillance, 24 hours a day. 2 guards sat in her cell at all times, watching her every move. They watched her dress, they watched her eat, they even watched her use the primitive toilet, which was nothing more than a bucket in the corner. Privacy, a basic human dignity, had been completely stripped away. The psychological warfare was deliberate and calculated. The revolutionaries wanted to break her spirit before they broke her neck. They succeeded in ways that are almost too horrible to imagine. The former queen's health collapsed entirely during these weeks. She began hemorrhaging severely, a condition that historians believe was either severe menstrual bleeding or internal bleeding from stress and malnutrition. Her bedding had to be changed constantly because it was soaked in blood. Guards reported that the smell in her cell was overwhelming. But here's where the story takes an even darker turn. Some historians argue that Marie Antoinette's physical deterioration wasn't entirely natural. Dr. Cabanis, a physician who examined other prisoners, noted that several inmates showed signs of gradual poisoning. Could the revolutionaries have been slowly killing her while keeping her alive for their show trial? The evidence is circumstantial but disturbing. Other prisoners in the Conciergerie reported feeling increasingly weak and sick during their imprisonment. Many developed similar symptoms to Marie Antoinette: severe bleeding, dramatic weight loss, and premature aging. Was this simply the result of terrible prison conditions, or something more sinister? We may never know for certain, but what we do know is that by September 1793, the woman who entered the Conciergerie was barely recognizable as the Marie Antoinette who had once danced at Versailles. She had lost so much weight that her clothes hung on her like burial shrouds. Her once beautiful hands were now skeletal, marked with sores and cuts. Her famous blue eyes had become sunken and hollow. And still, her captors weren't satisfied. They were preparing something that would make her physical suffering seem minor in comparison. A trial that was less about justice and more about public humiliation. On October 12, 1793, Marie Antoinette was dragged before the Revolutionary Tribunal for what historians now recognize as one of the most predetermined trials in history. The verdict had been decided before she even entered the courtroom, but the revolutionaries needed to create a spectacle that would justify their actions to the world. The charges against her were both absurd and terrifying. She was accused of sending military secrets to Austria, corrupting her husband, and conspiring against French liberty. But perhaps the most bizarre charge was that she had taught her son counter-revolutionary principles. Essentially, they were accusing her of the crime of being a mother to a royal child. What makes this trial even more chilling is that Marie Antoinette was given almost no time to prepare a defense. Her lawyer, Claude Chauveau-Lagarde, was appointed just days before the trial and was forbidden from seeing most of the evidence against her. This wasn't justice, it was tea. But Marie Antoinette surprised everyone during these proceedings. The broken woman from the Conciergerie cell somehow found the strength to defend herself with dignity and intelligence. When accused of corrupting her husband, she replied, "I was only his wife. It is natural for a woman to follow her husband's political opinions." When charged with teaching her son to hate the revolution, she said, "I have never taught him to hate anyone. I have only taught him to love France." Her composure during the trial was remarkable, especially considering her physical condition. Court observers noted that she could barely stand for long periods and had to grip the rail in front of her to keep from collapsing. Her voice was weak, but her answers were clear and logical. Perhaps the most haunting moment came when the prosecutor asked her to explain her correspondence with foreign powers. Marie Antoinette's response was simple but devastating. A mother will do anything to save her child. The trial lasted 2 days, but everyone in that courtroom knew it was all for show. The verdict was announced on October 15th, death by guillotine. Marie Antoinette received the news with the same composure she had shown throughout the trial. She simply nodded and asked if she could write a letter to her sister-in-law. That letter would become one of the most heartbreaking documents in history. Marie Antoinette's last letter is a masterpiece of forgiveness that seems impossible given her circumstances. Writing by candlelight in her tiny cell, she forgave her executioners, expressed hope that France would find peace, and asked her daughter to forgive those who had condemned their family. "I die free of hatred for those who condemned me," she wrote. "I hope that my death will be useful to France and that it will restore the calm that the country needs." How does someone find such grace in the face of such cruelty? Some historians believe that Marie Antoinette had found peace in accepting her fate. Others argue that she was trying to protect her surviving children by appearing non-threatening to the revolutionaries. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. Her final night was spent in prayer and reflection. Guards reported that she barely slept, instead spending hours on her knees despite her weakness. She had requested a priest for her final confession, and Father Gerard secretly administered her last rites before dawn. At 6 a.m. on October 16th, 1793, the guards came for her. Marie Antoinette had prepared herself as best she could, given her circumstances. She had washed with the small basin of water provided and had tried to arrange her white hair under a simple cap. Her dress was the same black mourning gown she had worn since her husband's death, now stained and worn from months of imprisonment. The journey from the Conciergerie to the Place de la Révolution took nearly an hour through the streets of Paris. Marie Antoinette was forced to ride in a common cart, her hands bound behind her back, while thousands of people lined the streets to witness her final humiliation. But here's what's remarkable. Contemporary accounts describe her as maintaining her dignity even in these final moments. She kept her head high, looked straight ahead, and showed no emotion as the crowd screamed insults and threats. One observer wrote, "She appeared to be praying rather than listening to the hatred around her." When the cart finally reached the scaffold at 12:15 p.m., Marie Antoinette climbed the steps without assistance. She even apologized to the executioner when she accidentally stepped on his foot. Her last words were reportedly, "Monsieur, I ask your pardon. I did not do it on purpose." At 12:15 p.m., exactly 38 years after she had first arrived in France as a 14-year-old bride, Marie Antoinette's life ended with the fall of the guillotine blade. But Marie Antoinette's story doesn't end with her death. In fact, some of the most intriguing mysteries begin there. Her body was thrown into an unmarked grave, along with hundreds of other victims of the revolution. For over 20 years, no one knew exactly where she was buried. It wasn't until 1815, after Napoleon's fall, that investigators found what they believed to be her remains in the Madeleine Cemetery. But here's where things get strange. The body they found was almost perfectly preserved, unlike other remains from the same time period. How was this possible? Some historians suggest the soil conditions were unusual. Others wonder if she was actually buried elsewhere and the body found in 1815 belonged to someone else entirely. Even more mysterious is the fate of her son, Louis Charles. Official records state that he died in the Temple Tower in 1795 at age 10. But numerous people throughout the 19th century claimed to be the lost Dauphin who had somehow escaped. DNA testing in 2000 seemed to settle the question, but some researchers still argue that the results were inconclusive. Perhaps the greatest mystery is why Marie Antoinette became such a symbol of royal excess when historical evidence suggests she was actually more moderate than most nobles of her time. Recent scholarship has revealed that many of the stories about her extravagance were revolutionary propaganda designed to justify her execution. The woman who supposedly said, "Let them eat cake," a phrase she never actually uttered, may have been more victim than villain. Today, Marie Antoinette rests in the royal crypt at Saint-Denis, finally reunited with her husband after centuries apart. But the questions surrounding her life and death continue to fascinate historians and the public alike. Was she the spoiled queen of revolutionary propaganda, or a loving mother caught in the crossfire of history? Were her final days the result of revolutionary justice, or calculated cruelty designed to break the spirit of the old regime? Perhaps the most important question is what her story tells us about how quickly civilized society can descend into barbarism, and how ordinary people can participate in extraordinary cruelty when convinced they're serving a greater cause. Marie Antoinette's horrific final days remind us that behind every historical figure, no matter how famous or infamous, is a human being who experienced fear, pain, love, and loss just like the rest of us. Her story isn't just about the fall of the French monarchy. It's about the fragility of human dignity and the power of forgiveness in the face of unimaginable suffering. What do you think? Was Marie Antoinette a victim of her circumstances, or did she deserve the fate that befell her? The answer might reveal more about us than about her.